How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great discussion today. We're going to talk about red flags that you may ignore in the real world, but we never ignore in prison, and how to defend yourself. Guys, we work around predators all day. We are trained in how to manage them, how to address them, how to react to them, including their many games. And I thought what we could do today, me and Russ, is kind of share some of our expertise, because the same behaviors that you see in prison are definitely the behaviors that you see on the outside. So we're going to kind of break down, I think, 8 of them, and just hopefully this helps you in the real world. You never know when these skills or just tips will be needed. All right, so let me get Russ. What up, Russ?
Hey, good morning, Anthony. How's it going?
Good. Hey, Russ, you mind introducing yourself real quick?
Sure. My name is Russ Hamilton. I am a former and now retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Started my career way back in 1989 at San Quentin State Prison. Later on, after I retired, I became a senior juvenile correctional officer at a local facility here in the county where I live. Beyond that, I now work for a private company where we do reentry and rehabilitation work for a local county jail where I'm a case manager, and for a local probation department. I am also the founder of Keepers of Chaos, which is on Facebook. That's Chaos with a K. And we seek to provide support and training and camaraderie and content and history for all things correctional, whether you wear the badge or whether you're, hired by a correctional facility for some other function. And let's see, I am also a brand new author of a book that I am very, very proud of, called Killing Complacency: Tactical Awareness for Correctional Professionals. And that is available on Amazon. This is my very first book. I think that it's really relevant because even though everyone will often blame complacency for things, I've never seen it addressed, not in any substantial way. And I address it in a very substantial way, I assure you. So basically, that's it for me, other than I am also here on Tier Talk quite a bit.
All right, guys. So this is going to be a good discussion, because in corrections, one of the classes that we do, or we provide, but also through everyday experience, we deal with manipulation. So with that said, I believe that for us, this training doesn't just apply to how we carry ourselves in the prison or the jails, but also in real life. We recognize manipulation when we're dealing with trying to buy a new car, or someone's trying to push us into something we don't want to do. And I think there's a lot of things that you should recognize, a lot of common tactics that may fall into what you believe are everyday interactions that we are now going to point out to you. Now, granted, just like we teach staff, this is all about universal precaution. This is about balancing what we're providing you with what is happening in real time. Not every person is trying to manipulate. So we don't want to make you feel paranoid because we are giving you these tools. These are just tools to rather just hold into the back of your mind and know when to apply them. That's always the scary thing when you're teaching people lessons that are like this, is that they're going to over apply it. They're going to get a sense of paranoid because we're showing you a side of humanity that most people, they don't know exists, or they don't want it to exist, or they don't believe it exists. But either way, it exists. I mean, me and Russ work in prison. It exists. So this is just an effort to show you some of the tactics that are employed. I have a couple of discussion questions me and Russ will go through. Now, Russ is not aware of the questions. I don't tell him that ahead of time. So we just basically, the dialogue is pretty much unprepared, which is good because we're leaning totally on our experience. Okay, so again, red flags that you may ignore in the real world, but we never ignore in prison, and how to defend yourself. Now, me and Russ, what we'll do today is we'll, tell you why we never ignore it in prison, but then why you got to be very wary of it on the outside world. So the first thing I have is overfamiliarity or flattery. So why predators use it. Flattery lowers defenses. People want to believe praise is genuine, so it becomes a soft entry point. So in prison, this is a common grooming tactic to blur professional boundaries. So what do they look for? They look for people who seem eager for validation, approval, or attention. If someone lights up at praise or craves recognition, predators sense they'll be more responsive. Motive: to build obligation. Every compliment or small favor lays groundwork for a future ask, whether it's breaking a rule inside or compliance outside. And as for a defense, usually accept compliments politely, but keep professional and personal distance. Don't let constant praise change how you enforce boundaries. So, Russ, first question I got here is, how can you tell when praise is genuine versus manipulative?
So, I mean, it can kind of, be dependent on, where that is coming from. Believe it or not, there are perhaps some inmates that are, more genuine and have at least tried to change. But I also believe that that's a distinction that doesn't need to be drawn. There are boundaries beyond which are not passed, regardless of whether or not the praise is genuine or not. And if you get caught up trying to, define and decide whether or not that's true, you've already lost the battle. This is where we fall back on that word universal, right? Universal precautions. Thank you, inmate, but you know what? That's inappropriate. Please don't, engage in that type of flattery, because it's just not appropriate. You have to call them on it. And this is one of the things that, we see a lot. It happens in a much more serious and, how shall I put it? It happens more often, a lot with our female officers. These inmates can be real dogs, and they are just trying to influence and woo. And, some of it is they just want female conversation. But the truth about it is at some point, they're trying to get in there with a quid pro quo to try and do something that benefits them. And it's very common. This is one of the most common things that I run into on a day-to-day basis.
Now, remember, Russ, we're also talking about real world application. So in real world application, it's tough, because part of everyday interaction is going to be people who are going to try to compliment you, because it's just everyday interaction. So in the prison, I love what Russ said. We're trained to basically not accept it. We acknowledge it and then tell the inmate pretty much where that compliment, if it was inappropriate. So, hey, officer, you're looking good. Inappropriate. And again, it's inappropriate because the officer sets the standards, not because the agency set the standards, but because the officer sets the standards. And it's pretty simple for us to do that. It's quick. You get a compliment. I'm sorry, this compliment is unprofessional. At this point, I would recommend that you don't do that again. And you also should document it, because usually those small little compliments could lead to something bigger. That's why, every little thing in a prison matters. Now, some people may think, wow, that's extreme. Yeah, in the real world, maybe. But in the prison, it's not, because that's pretty much 99% of the first step that's taken when an inmate decides to play their game. But again, there's also balance. Sometimes, as Russ mentioned, I mean, there could be something genuine. You saved an inmate's life, and an inmate may, thank you for that or recognize you for that. Okay, it makes sense. It's within the context of what happened. But with that said, I'm not reliant on that. I whether he agreed with what I did or not, I'm not reliant on that. That's another thing that matters, is sometimes inmates build compliments, or they say things in a level of recognition, so they hope that you rely on it. For example, there are some people that are very got great work ethic, and they know that. And sometimes the inmate will walk by and compliment the work ethic. So we're not looking at superficial compliment. We're looking at a work ethic. And some people will take that compliment to heart. And now what will happen is, if they start relying on that compliment, they wind up actually start kind of doing their job based on the inmate's approval, looking for the next compliment. And we don't do that in corrections, So basically, okay, thank you for what you said. And then you kind of keep it moving. But with that said, I think in the real world, for me, I know it may be hard to judge whether something's genuine versus manipulative, but I really do think it's a feeling. If the compliment is really surface, and what I mean by surface is they don't even know you. They don't know you. So a surface one could be easy. Okay, you look good, blah, blah, blah. Okay, whatever. But if there's a compliment that is something like, hey, I really like your personality, your drive. Well, we just met 5 minutes ago. You don't know any of that at all. And the biggest thing about compliments is I think that's one of the first steps that happen. Two things happen. One, it could lead to obligation, especially if you really want that compliment. And two, for people that may have low self-esteem, a lot of manipulative people will believe that you rely on that compliment to build your self-esteem. So that becomes a real big tool to give and take away, give and take away, give and take away, because they know you've become dependent on those compliments for your own self-esteem. Hey, Russ, why do people often dismiss excessive flattery as just being nice?
I think that it's, I think that there's a protocol in human society where we engage and we often open with some rather surface things in an attempt to just kind of, have an icebreaker. And so I know that that's one of the things that I attempt to do myself when I'm introduced to someone. I will, bring up, oh, yes, such and such mentioned you. And, try and bring up something positive that individual said about them. Because I want to establish rapport. This is one of the things that often goes on sometimes in things like motivational interviewing and, trying to, understand the other person in order that we can actually have a conversation. If we're brusque, or if we're curt and we just kind of like, oh, yeah, whatever. Then what we can kind of do is we kind of break that immediacy of an ability to interact and communicate. Now, there's a big difference between the real world, where all of those things are acceptable, and the correctional world, where very few of those things are acceptable. And we have that attached affirmative duty to be professional within our own realm of employment there. And so there's a lot of things that go on and happen in the real world that we just may not pay attention to, or we just brush off because it's not going to affect us in any great way. You better be watching out when you're inside those walls, though, because little things have a way of blowing up into big things.
Yeah, and I like to say something here in partnership. Russ says, in corrections, we're trained at some level to embrace conflict. We're not afraid to tell people no. And with that said, if you are afraid to tell people no, you really can't be in corrections, because that's going to be a majority of your day. And we're not looking
Yes.
and we're not looking for social acceptance. Like I'm not worried about being socially awkward with an inmate when I have to tell them no. At that point here, it's my job. It's what's defined in my professional duties, routines. So I think a lot of times for the question here, why do people often dismiss excessive flattery, is because you got to call the person out on it. So sometimes people rather dismiss it than deal with the direct conflict of saying, hey, this is a little bit too much, or it's not making me feel right. I feel something funny about this. It's coming on too fast, too strong. What's going on? So I think instead of people calling it out for what it is and calling that person out, sometimes they're afraid that I'm going to hurt the person's feelings. Where as a correctional officer, if you're going to play that game, the last in my mind is how you're going to feel by what I'm going to say. Not to be callous, I'm not really worried about that. If I feel that someone's trying to break a barrier, a boundary with me, I don't really care how you feel about what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you what I expect of you. I'm not even going to share my feelings with you. I'm going to tell you what I expect from you. It's a quick, direct. I'm not going to tell you, hey, what you said made me feel this way. I'm not even leaving that open. What I'm going to tell you is what you said is wrong. It's that simple. It's that black and white. But I think a lot of times in the real world, again, there's the want to be socially approved. We're human beings. We're raised to connect. We don't want conflict. But when you start to feel it, you got to say something. So I think I said people become dismissive because they don't want to call that behavior to the surface because they know that it could lead to conflict or what if I'm wrong? It really doesn't matter. You have to trust yourself, trust how you feel, because a lot of times when someone's been a victim of a crime and hopefully, they survive, but let's say, they survive and they go back and they look at what they've done wrong. A lot of the times when they look at what they've done wrong, they notice signs, but they didn't want to act on it because they thought it was maybe socially unacceptable to call somebody out. They were more concerned about how they appeared to others as opposed to their own safety and well-being. All right, Russ, let's get to the next one. I have boundary testing through small violations. So why predators use it? It's kind of touched on this, but their testing starts small because direct violations are risky. A little push shows where the line is and whether you'll enforce it. What they look for: hesitation, nervous laughter, or silence when a boundary is crossed. If you don't resist, they know they can escalate. What's their motive? To identify who is pliable. Inmates test officers with minor requests. Predators in society test with jokes, touches, or small asks. Each ignored violation gives them data. And the defense obviously is to push back early. A simple, confident no stops escalation before it starts. Hey, Russ, why is it harder to enforce boundaries on small things than big ones?
Because we're as a society in general, taught to be polite, and so there is a surface level of things that we dismiss. We think of it as being sort of a de minimis type of thing, and so we don't press those issues, because if we press those tiny issues, then all we tend to do is build barriers. A lot of times, when we think about, this boundary testing is not just testing the boundary itself. It's an attempt to actually move the boundary, in a different direction. So these kind of, probing, searching, and desensitizing type of attacks is also an opportunity for them to make the person feel more comfortable with what's being said, with what's going on, and to remove the initial alarm. And so you press that forward. The moment that you meet resistance, you back off, and so you move backwards away from that. And then in a day or two or 10 or whatever it is, you push again, you move the barrier a little bit further, and you just keep on with that until that person is within your grasp of either extortion, blackmail, violating their oath of office. We see this, unfortunately, many times with, sexual activity that finally occurs. And that's the way that it's done, is in these, you're not trying to take all that territory all at once, because that will get attention. You make that person feel comfortable with the territory that's been taken, which is a very tiny amount.
Yes, and remember, guys, everything we're saying is in context. Now, listen, a lot of predators, they like to invade body space because it kind of is the first boundary in most cases that's being tested, including not just being up close to you, but also kind of touching you a little bit in areas. That's the ultimate break, and then how you react to that. Now, a lot of us, it's funny because we may feel a certain way, as I mentioned before, but then we don't act, and then we start to justify our own reason for not acting. So we minimize our feelings of discomfort and find justification in for the person who invaded our personal space. And it's funny because we now push our own feelings down and then give excuses to the other person as to why they were in my personal space, or why they touched me and I don't even know this person. So I think the boundaries that are really pushed, the small boundaries, they don't push for anything reactionary. They're testing you and how you deal with the feelings that I think we all have feelings that we either choose to react on or choose not to. Some people who react on it, they really listen to themselves and say, well, that person's paranoid. No, they're true to themselves. They felt something wasn't correct. They listened to themselves. And you got to be careful when you start telling people to push down those feelings, because most of the time when you tell someone to push down those feelings, it's usually because they're doing something that you believe may not be socially acceptable. Like, oh, how could you tell Russ that? That's going to get Russ mad. Why are you cared about Russ being mad? I shouldn't care about Russ. If I'll give you an example. If my kid has a problem with an adult, usually it's an adult, let's say, that could be closest to them. A lot of people are more concerned about the relationship with the adult than they are about what your kid just told you. So sometimes you got to ask your kid, hey, what happened? Why'd you feel that way? As opposed to just dismissing it. Oh, you're being disrespectful to such and such. No, why do they feel that way? Let's talk to your kid first. Let's find out what's going on, because having said that, maybe there's something that we're not seeing that the kid is reacting to. But with that said, I think here to answer the question, one last thing is, why is it harder to enforce boundaries on small things than big ones? And I think what I pretty much got at are the small things are ambiguous. They're tests. So this is where you have to decide whether you're going to allow for that boundary to exist or not. And that's the hard part, because this is where it's filled with ambiguity. That's what it is. It's like, man, this is so small. Should I react? But, what's the next step? So maybe I should set something down now, because if I don't, then each step, yes, is still very small, but they're taking they're taking more steps forward. So it's funny, because each small step is related to the step before it. But when you really look at what you've allowed someone to do in the long term, it's not a step, it's a fucking leap. But we compare each step to the step before. It's what I call incremental compliance. Basically, it's a small step that opens up the door to another small step, always on a progressive scale. So it's like, oh, well, you know what? It's okay. It's okay. When did we get this far? We always talk about the speed limit, right? 65 is the speed limit. We know we'll probably let people go 70. And then all of a sudden, when 70 becomes a speed limit, people are going 75. And it's like, well, it's not that bad, because, it's only 5 miles. No, it wasn't. It's 65 was the speed limit. You're already 10 miles over, but you're only comparing it to 70, if that makes sense. So you got to reinforce it, regardless of if you're concerned about how someone else is going to feel. And as I said, usually small boundaries are the ones that are a little bit ambiguous, but those are the ones you should act on, because that's what's opening the door for them to continue moving forward. And then sadly, when it finally happens and they take full advantage of you, it usually starts off on something that you felt wasn't right, but you choose not to react because you were more concerned about how someone else would feel or how you would be perceived. Okay, so I got isolation.
Let me just say one thing, and I'll just let people ruminate on this. Conquered territory is very difficult to take back.
Well, you got to add on that, though, Russ. Come on, that was good.
I know. I want people to stew in their own brains and just go, yeah, wow, because it is. It's very difficult to take back.
All right, so I got isolation and cutting off support. So let me go to the next one. So why predators use it? Isolation removes alternative perspectives or counter influence, I like to say. With no support network, the victim relies entirely on the predator. What they look for, people who are already socially disconnected, insecure, or craving closeness. Isolation is easiest when someone lacks a strong circle. Motive: to monopolize influence. Inmates isolate targets to hide manipulation. Predators outside isolate victims to prevent outside interference. And the defense is maintain relationships. If someone discourages contact with others, recognize that as a control, not care. I want to mention something, Russ, before you dive into this personal question or the discussion question is, I want to just mention one thing, guys. Manipulators is not just about the individual. The real people that look for control, they look to control the situation. They look to control the environment. They look to control who that person's resources are, because there's a lot in play that can counter influence the person's attempt to play their game. So with that said, having those strong circles matter, because if it becomes too much of an obstacle, then usually they'll move on to their next prey. But with that said, a lot of people think, oh, it's funny. It's like, man, that person must have been gullible. Okay, maybe, but so was the environment. So was their resources. So was the situation. There's a lot of things there outside of the person that manipulator is looking at. Trust and believe. It's not just the person. Yes, the person could have been gullible, but we're supposed to help each other. We're supposed to balance things out. In corrections, if an officer gets set up and winds up going down a wrong path, yes, I'm not minimizing the officer's accountability. But trust and believe that inmate that wanted to exploit that officer also looked at the environment, looked at the situation, and jumped on whatever opportunity it was. So if we don't look at manipulation in a way where it's a team effort to avoid, then they're going to get their targets. All right, so Russ, why does isolation make victims easier to control?
So, if you think about this as a circle of influence, if I'm the manipulator and I want to start pressing home my influence over someone, the best way for me to do that is to remove their support within other circles of influence. So I try and woo that person into my circle of influence while also countering and removing the influence of other people. So there's different ways that is accomplished. Sometimes this is through some conversation, where hey, they'll bring up, hey, what such and such said about you, and I just didn't think that was right. And so they try and build and erect barriers. Or it can be, or it can even just be the fact that sometimes these people will display some type of animus, or get into an argument with this other person, because then it puts the victim of having to choose sides. And even though it's not something that's expressly said, it's something that's tacitly identified. And so when we tacitly identify, what's going on, these manipulators are just trying to pull that person into their sphere of influence while cutting it off from them. How can they remain friends with me if they still like and they hang around this person that I've had this conflict with? And so these are things that the really advanced manipulators will do, and it's those things. It's also trying to start labeling things in a way of where it's us versus them, or it's us versus this one other individual. And so what happens is they're trying to impress on this person that they need to identify their loyalties and then act them out. And if they act them out, and then it shows that, hey, yes, they are on my side, then I've really achieved what I need to achieve, because now it's there is no support from these places and individuals that we've cut off, and we've isolated this person into our position. And you see this sometimes with officers that are not well versed in understanding where their loyalties lie. They're too chummy with the inmates. There's overfamiliarity, or they isolate themselves from staff, and they identify more with the inmates than they do other staff. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And guys, in the real world too, a big part of manipulation I want to mention is obligation. We talked about that, but that's the lighter form of manipulation. That's the more subtle until it gets exploited. But eventually there's a more extreme that I also find in the outside world a lot, is a sense of dependency, which means that if I can cut off all your resources, maybe I'm the sole source that you're dependent on, and I'm able to trap you there. So now you can't go to anybody, and now I'm the one that's the only person that can help you. And that does happen a lot. That's an extreme case, but it happens a lot where people feel trapped because it's like, well, they know the person is playing the game, but their reason for not leaving has nothing to do for their own safety, but rather for their own, to some level, survival. And what I mean by survival is, if I leave, they have control of this, and this. Okay, still leave. We could figure that all out later. You know, you can still leave. We'll figure it all out later. But at the end of the day, that's just the way that they maintain some level of control. But isolation is key, as I mentioned before. I don't need to rehash, but it's the counter influence. And the counter influence is what matters here. And guys, sometimes we isolate ourselves. Got to be careful of that, because that is a vulnerability. That's not a strength. Hey, Russ, how can you tell the difference between being protective? Oh, sorry. How can you tell the difference between protective concern and possessive control? Because that is a key when it comes to the game of isolation, is that they try to showcase another avenue that they're protecting you when it's not. You're trying to own me.
Yeah, I think that overall, that's much easier to see in the correctional side of things, because there are labels and established boundaries that are reliant upon policy and procedure and common sense and training and everything else we do. And so it becomes in the real world, it's more difficult, because who's to say where those boundaries exist or don't exist, because there's just a level of interaction that we should not be having with inmates.
Yeah, and I think in the real world, there's a level of gaslighting here too. If I can paint a negative picture of your friends, of the people that are really there trying to help you, but they're an obstacle to what I'm trying to accomplish, then it will come off as being protective. So this is where you have to trust your own feelings, trust your gut, trust who you know, trust what they're about. Because I think a lot of the games that are played really only continue to play because you fail to act on your gut feelings that tells you something's wrong. And instead of just trying to embrace the final conflict, the conflict that you need to embrace to get through this mess, you look to avoid it until it becomes the way you live. Ain't that the funny thing is one conflict could change everything, but you rather avoid the conflict and live through all this because it's just easier, and it's not, because it's technically a life that is far from what you're worthy of. All right, so the next one, Russ. This is more towards the softer side of obligation, but I have over helping and creating debt. So why predators use it? People hate feelings being indebted. So by giving too much help, predators create a psychological debt that demands repayment. So what they look for, individuals who struggle saying no to offers, or who quickly accept help without questioning motives. Motive to set up future compliance. Inmates use small favors to rope staff into rule breaking. Predators outside do it to push for bigger ask later. And the defense is usually accept help thoughtfully. Real generosity has no strings. Manipulative generosity always does. And Russ, why do we feel obligated to repay even unwanted favors?
I know people may not like this or agree with this, but being a human being and the way that we interact with each other, believe it or not, or like it or not, it's actually a very transactional thing, right? And so the things that grease the wheel of this transactionality, if we want to call it that, is a little something called a quid pro quo, right? And quid pro quo just means this for that. And so we are constantly doing that, and someone does a little favor, and whether they think about it or not, it's in expectation for some other favor back, even if it's just a nod and a thank you. And so because of the way we just get caught up in all this transactional stuff, and it's normal, and it's just part of being human. But when it's taken to certain levels, and by this I mean specifically with inmates, hey, I'm going to do a really good job for you as a clerk, and in exchange, you're going to cut me a little bit of slack with regards to the amount of property that I have, the type of property that I have, and maybe you're going to, make sure that I don't get searched as hard, and that I'm able to, skate on a few things. And then the next thing that's starting to snowball, and then You never meant for it to, but suddenly it becomes a security breach. All right. And so because our very nature and the way that we interact with all of society is in this transactional fashion, it starts to seem normal. It starts to seem acceptable. And we've gone from looking at policy and procedure to just looking at the way we normally do things. And the relationships that we have with inmates and the way that we, have to exercise both our power and our responsibility and our duty for care and so forth is not a normal everyday thing. This is something that we have to be engaged in a lot of mindfulness about.
Yeah, and guys, in corrections, our job is to protect our professional control. And I say professional control because it also deals with ourselves, our emotions. We do have to have some level of control over ourselves, but we definitely don't want to be controlled by the inmate population. And obligation, actually, believe it or not, gives up that control. It just does. I've done for you, and now eventually it's going to be leveraged out, and it takes a while, but like Russ said, the quid pro quo, I do for you, but eventually I'm going to want the favor in return. And obligation, I think, is the center of a lot of manipulation, because you can even feel obligated to someone who makes you feel good. So now the moment you have to address them on something, you want to be careful. Wow, that person always makes me feel good, but what they did was wrong. What do I do? What you do is you address them. I mean, sometimes we, as I said, our feelings, they don't complicate things. They give you clarity. You make it complicated when you feel that you should be hesitant when something that you feel should be addressed should get addressed. So again, it's feelings don't make things complicated. Sometimes they give things clarity, and your interpretation of what you have to do next based on the games that are being played against you is what makes it complicated. So sometimes the best way to alleviate the complication is bring the games to the surface. Like in corrections, if an inmate says, I do this and I'll do it for you. No, you're doing it because I gave you an order. And if you don't do it, then I'll find someone else who can. And it sounds so harsh, but it's not, because believe it or not, in corrections, it's controlled by that extreme because it has to. And I guess in the real world, those extremes, they may not exist, but there's a more politeful way to do it. But in corrections, there's a zero tolerance here for that level of failure. So we protect it with everything we got. If an inmate goes, hey, Gange, I'll do you the favor. No, you're doing the order I told you. And you quickly correct it, because that one word, it opens up to so much down the line that you correct it immediately. You set the tone. It's like, I didn't ask you for a favor. I don't even think it was an ask. I gave you a directive. And I'm not, you don't just do it for me. If anybody else gave you that directive, you would. So again, I think it just, that sense of debt is something that you feel pulls you, and you have to be able to cut that immediately. And again, it's always about social awkwardness. It's like, who cares? Just tell them how you feel. Hey, Russ, how do you politely decline help without creating conflict? And you know what's funny about this question? If I'm not too much worried. If I feel something isn't right, I'll embrace conflict. Conflict is not something I'm going to worry about when it comes to my survival, when it comes to doing what's best for me in the moment, because at the end of the day, I don't want to have that as something that controls me or prevents me from doing what I need to do. So if it says, how do you politely decline help without creating conflict? And I guess this is more in the real world. I would say I don't need it. And if they keep on pushing it, hey, I just told you I don't need it. At this time, I appreciate the effort. I really do. But I don't need it. And then just stand by that. I'm not, at that point here, conflict or not. Conflict is not by what I'm doing. Conflict is how someone else wants to interpret it who has a motive. So granted, I'm not the one presenting the conflict because I'm standing on my own 2 feet saying I don't need your help. It's the person who receives it who has a game that they want to play. What's your thoughts, Russ?
Yeah, I agree with that. It's just, you have to, you just have to become a strong person, and you just have to, be able to push back and not worry about whether or not it seems polite. If you get a chance to add the politeness in there, yay, we've added another ingredient to the cake. But if your goal is politeness, you're never going to be able to, you're really never going to be able to push back on that.
Ain't that the key? And that's the funny thing. I think a lot of people were. So the funny thing is, guys, is this is where, a lot of us are born and raised to be polite and all this other stuff, but they're never taught for the balance of that. Where in corrections, it's funny because so let me explain something. I think this will make sense. I don't think something we ever talked on this channel before. So there's always a balance to things in life, and I think it's funny because in the real world you're taught to be polite. You're taught to do for others, and that's great because it is how most people should live. But with that, that could also make you vulnerable. So having said that, that's great in a perfect world, but at one point, what happens if those traits, those things that you were taught, you're being taken advantage of. That's why we, in the prison world, people that come in with their want to help has to make sure that it doesn't supersede logic, that they're not manipulated into making sure that that's their only function, or that they work directly for the inmate. No, there's rules behind what you can do, what you should do and not do, and your want to help should never supersede the right thing to do as prescribed by the agency. Now, on the prison side, you're taught the extreme. You don't want to be taken advantage of, so you're taught the extreme. I'm not saying you can't be polite, but you're not going to be vulnerable. You're not going to be open to the games, and you're not going to be afraid to tell someone, "Hey, I gave you this order," and no, you're not going to do that, and all this other stuff. I'm not worried about being socially acceptable, because if I am in a prison, then I really don't run my ship. Basically, I'm doing it based on the inmate's approval, because 9 times out of 10, if I give an inmate an order and they don't like that order, they're going to basically try to say, well, you know what, Gange, but me not, Russ lets me do it, or, you're the only officer that I don't care. If the order is the order stands, and I really don't care how you feel about it. If I have to change an order, I always can. I'm not saying I'm a brick wall here, but if you're trying to utilize how you feel about something to tell me why you don't want to follow the order, as opposed to I'm telling you why the order can't be done versus based on rules, policy, and procedure, your feelings, I'm sorry. I can't let your feelings sway me into doing something that is against my prescribed role. And trust and believe, this is the tug of war all day that correctional staff are dealing with. So now to take both lessons, what I was taught and raised to be, and what happens in the prison, how I learned to provide some level of universal precaution through every interaction, has not made me harder, just made me more strategic in what I do and don't do. That's the balance we're bringing here. The balance we're bringing here are taking two extremes and place it in the middle, saying it's okay to do the right thing. It's okay to be raised by, be polite, be given. But also there's a point where you could be taken advantage of, and that's up to you to draw the line, nobody else. All right, Russ, this is kind of relates to this. We got a couple more. Exploiting vulnerabilities. So why predators use it. So vulnerabilities equal leverage. Once someone's weaknesses are known, they can be exploited for control. So what do they look for? Open sharing about struggles, financial stress, past trauma, or just self-doubt. The more personal details shared, the more ammunition available. And remember, guys, and Russ will say this, I'll say it, most people, when you say you're vulnerable, they try to be some level of empathetic. They try to have some level of empathy, maybe even sympathy. But for someone that's a predator, they're not going to do that. This is all ammunition for them, so they can create leverage later on and exploit your vulnerabilities. What's the motive? It's to gain control through shame, secrecy, or dependency. Inmates probe staff for family or financial struggles. Predators outside do the same to establish leverage. What's the defense? Share selectively. Vulnerability is healthy in safe relationships, but oversharing with the wrong person creates risk. Hey, Russ, why do predators gravitate towards people who overshare?
So when you talk about, oversharing, that is one of the things that if they can look at and they can, start seeing all the things that are being enumerated, they can identify what the stressors are in that person's life. That person that overshares all the time, puts those stressors on display. They're having problems at home with their family. They're having problems at work with certain individuals. Maybe they don't feel, comfortable in their role as a correctional officer, and that's a huge one, man. When they identify that, then they can turn that right smack dab into a us versus them type of scenario. So all of those things and being able to identify what someone's stressors are allows for a lot of different interplay, feigned sympathy or even real sympathy, that's too bad about, your son, having, such bad asthma. My son had that too. And, we had to have him on, all kinds of different inhaled steroids, and they can, make up all the stories that they want about a lot of different things. And then when people start identifying with that individual, it puts them, on a par with each other. This person is like me. I am like this person. And what we've done then is we've knocked down the barriers and the borders between us, and that is just dangerous, very, very dangerous inside the setting. And this is one of the huge beefs I have with this, new California model, as it were, is there are supposed to be barriers between us so that we can maintain safety and security for all.
Yeah, and guys, the longer you allow for these behaviors to happen, they become accepted patterns. So, I mean, it really is good to address it as quick as possible, because if it is just something that you just allow to happen and the moment you go to address it, which is maybe years down the line, it becomes a lot more difficult, because you've established a pattern that's totally against it when you could have established it right from the get-go. You could deal with a brief little negative interaction right now, or you could wait for years and then make it blow up, because now it is a shift because you allowed it to get this far, but still has to be addressed. I'm not saying it doesn't have to be addressed. But for here, we learned this in the prison, basically. You give up too much personal information, it's leverage. So you got to have your trusted circles in real life. And these are people who have earned that trust. I mean, you really got to know them. I mean, because even your closest people could also be manipulators. You don't know, but you got to have people that you trust, and again, I do. I have people I can go to. I go to Russ. I go to, obviously, my wife, my family. I mean, you got to have people you can trust. Those are the people that you can be vulnerable with, but you got to be careful when you're vulnerable with everyone. And a lot of people just love to share their concerns and love to share their struggles. If I don't know you, may not really care so much about what you're going through, but I'll pretend to listen. That's a great way in for me, but I don't know you. I don't care. I really don't care. I met you 5 minutes ago and I care about all this. No, I'm planning on, maybe taking and then moving on to the next person. So it's not like some people are so willing to give out all their struggles just to anybody. And then like, oh, that person doesn't even know you. I mean, trust me, most of us don't want to hear negativity. So usually when someone wants to hear it, it's usually because there could be a motive connected to it. So you just got to be very wary of oversharing, protect yourself, because at the end, if you're going to give someone all this information, trust and believe it could be exploited, because when you're vulnerable, they can find a way to be your strength. And then eventually that strength becomes what you rely on. And now eventually it kind of goes back to the other games, isolation. Everything else kind of coexists together. The perfect manipulator knows how to kind of utilize this, not as isolated tactics, but in tandem and together. All right, so I got 3 more of us, and then we're done. I got studying reactions and target selection. So why predators use this? I've kind of discussed this actually. So before committing any test, whatever, predators want to know if a target will resist. Observing reactions minimize their risk. What they look for: victims who freeze, laugh it off, or avoid confrontation when uncomfortable. Non-resistance marks them as a safer target. I also like to add the environment we talked about as well. Anything that would be a counter influence. The motive is to identify the easiest option. Predators don't waste time on people who push back strongly. And what's the defense is use strong nonverbal signals, eye contact, posture, firm voice to show resistance early. Yeah, your no can't be no. I mean, there's a difference in that. Hey Russ, 2 questions here we can knock out. Why is body language so important or why is body language so revealing to predators? And what small shifts in posture or tone can change how others perceive your strength? And Russ, this falls into your books on complacency. What we're sending to the inmates as well. that we may not be realized, because obviously softer posture could create to a softer mindset, but this definitely plays into the real world.
So one thing that I'll say is that most communication is nonverbal. And so that leaves a whole range of things outside of my words. When I look at, my own posture with regards to inmates, it's easy to impress upon them the fact that you are aware, you're alert, you are making sure about what's going on. Part of that is just the interaction with them. I'm making eye contact. I am looking for micro expressions in their face, not consciously, because that actually happens on a subconscious level. If you read about some of these things, and all of that is helping me identify what is actually going on. There is a lot of things that I can place in their way with regards to manipulation just by doing those things and by showing that, hey, I'm alert, I'm paying attention. I am projecting my command presence. I'm not leaning back. I don't have my hands in my pockets. I'm not, barely paying attention. I'm plugged into the process. And the instant that something is, starting to go to a way that makes me think like we're involved in some kind of circle talk or we're involved in some kind of negotiation, I'm going to bring it back and ride it to the direction it should be going. And then I'm going to take a look at what their reaction is to that. Because, for as much as we talk about manipulation and manipulative tactics, there are counter manipulation and counter manipulative tactics that we should be recognizing. Saying no, requiring in-depth responses, quizzing them with questions that are not yes and no, and making them realize that, we are on point. So, and I'll throw into there too, just being the type of person who exudes a command presence will really take care of a lot of that. Inmates are going to, look at right there where it says target selection. All right. So if an inmate is going out there and trying to figure, man, I need someone that I can get over on. Who is the person that they're going to get over on? The person with command bearing and a sense of, correctional awareness, or someone who just seems to be, punching in, checking the boxes and going home. Which one do you think?
Yeah. And Russ, that's spot on. Because I think the inmates know when they look at the target, they know their posture, their body language is a reflection of what's going on in their mind, and most of the time subconsciously, right? Like so sometimes people just have that natural posture because they have that command presence, and they don't even have to be intentional with it. They've learned to carry themselves. They condition themselves to do it. So it's just natural habit. They know how to walk into a room. They know how to walk into a tier. They just have it. Then you got some people who they're more intentional with it because they just may have self-doubt, whatever it is, or and they don't prepare themselves. And now inmates see that. They see that it doesn't quite align. You may kind of talk this way, but your body language is showing something totally different. So you get a lot of people that think they look confident, but they're not. And the inmates are trained just by looking at your body, because the stuff that you cannot control, the stuff that's harder for you to control, the stuff that's harder for you to control, those extremities, those hands, the way you're positioning yourself, you may say one thing, but your body language shows something else, and they will pounce when they see any level of inconsistency. And in the real world, same thing. If you have a target that just doesn't look confident, a target that doesn't look strong, I'm going to say in the real world too, a commanding presence to some level, you do leave yourself open to be targeted, because again, you present someone that could be easier to take advantage of. All right, two more, Russ. Emotional pressure, guilt, and silence. Why predators use it. So emotional pressure wears down resistance without force. Guilt trips and silent treatments create discomfort until compliance feels easier than refusal. And I will say this usually happens when there's a relationship that's already involved or a relationship that's already brewing. Because if I don't care too much about it, I'm not going to feel guilty for you. If you're silent, I don't really know you. I don't really care. But it's usually something that's been developed, maybe through obligation, maybe through them making you feel good, that now all of a sudden they start to play this game. Or the silence thing is the big thing, where I'm used to your attention, then you stop giving it to me. Now I need that for my approval. Somehow along my self-esteem's connected to that. So what they look for: people pleasers, conflict avoiders, or those who feel responsible for other emotions. That's the guilt part. And it's funny because the guilt, if you look at it from another way, you're making me feel guilty, but I'm taking it, and this may be the better way. You're blaming me. That's not going to happen. So some people may fall to the softer side of, you making me feel guilty. I don't. I look at that as you're blaming me for something that you're responsible for. And I do that with the inmates as well. If an inmate tries to say, hey, Gange, if you write me up, I'm not going to be able to have visits. Okay, well, you did it to yourself. You're not blaming me for not having visits. You did it to yourself. You're not making me feel guilty for what you're responsible for. The motive is usually to bypass outright resistance by weaponizing emotions. Inmates use sulking. Predators outside use guilt or coldness and defense. Stay consistent. A no doesn't change because someone pouts or withdraws. You're not responsible for their moods. Russ, 2 questions here. Why is guilt one of the most effective manipulation tools? And how do you train yourself to resist giving in just to restore peace?
So the easiest way that I can put this is the emotional part of both guilt and silence and what have you is really a super out of balance quid pro quo. You've done something that the person is offended by, hurt by, disadvantaged by, and then instead of kind of a transactional quid pro quo like we talked about before, suddenly there's a complete imbalance because of what this person claims you've done, has said you've done, or you even acknowledge that you've done. And now the balance of that quid pro quo is way out. In order for you to get back to where we're at a stasis level with that, you have to do something big. And even if that's just, acknowledgement of the fact that I was wrong, we're putting ourselves into that emotional manipulation phase right now, where this emotional disadvantage is creating a dissonance within you. And now you are acting outside the bounds of your duty. You're acting outside the bounds of what your responsibilities are, and you are being manipulated to the fullest. And this transfers equally right over into what we see in the real world. And people will do that. They will make sure that they find something to be offended by. That's what that's what's going on huge in society right now. Is people are searching for things to be offended about, so that they can throw this whole quid pro quo completely out of balance. And put their being offended and the triggers on display, and then secondly, be able to wag their finger and virtue signal over all of it.
Yeah, and guys, we all feel guilty. Good self-awareness matters. I mean, for me, when I feel guilty, I'm not pressured to feel guilty. I know myself well enough to know, yeah, I did something wrong. Let me go ahead and address that. But I'm not pressured to address it outside of my own willingness to address it. I just know myself well enough to know, maybe not in the moment I catch myself, but then later on, maybe I may think about something. I will really play into it and say, maybe I could have done it this way or that way. This way I'm motivated now to correct it and not being pressured because someone's playing the game. And believe it or not, the silence treatment is control. Because if you become truly dependent on that other person, for whatever it may be, because that's the key here. Dependence plays game on this, even through obligation, all that stuff. Dependence is key here. Then silence matters. I could be dependent on that person's approval. I could be dependent on how that person makes me feel. I mean, look at manipulation back in the day, like Joyce Mitchell, where she loved their praises. Her husband wasn't giving it to her, so she went ahead and got it from the inmates, gave it to her, and she lived by that. She needed that. So with that said, you become dependent on it. And all of a sudden, when the person cuts you off, you seek it. And you got to catch yourself. It's like, what am I doing? Like, okay, so you're silent. Okay, be silent. It is what it is. But silence is an attempt at control because they feel you're going to do whatever you can to break that silence because, however it is, they have manipulated your need for them to be a part of your life or whatever that communication is. All right. So last one, Russ. This is one of my favorite ones, actually. It's a secrecy and private pacts. So why predators use it? Secrecy creates loyalty and leverage. Once you keep one secret, you're more likely to keep bigger ones. We get this all the time in corrections when an inmate will say, hey, if I tell you something, you can't tell anybody else. It's a test to see where you go with the information you're given. And most likely I'll say, hey, until you tell me, I don't know what I'm going to do with the information you're going to give me. But they love to see if they tell you something, they'll know that it's reportable, but they'll tell you, hey, I'm going to say something, but you can't tell anybody else. And if they find out that nothing happened, then they know that, okay, I could play this person. I could play him. And they use that because it's an exchange. They try to play this bullshit of exchange of trust. Basically, I'll give you a little something so you can trust me. What they look for, people flattered by special trust or who dislike confrontation enough to hide things. Motive is to secure silence, secrets, protect predators, and trap victims into complicity. So again, they trust you with something and they just want to see where you go with it. Defense. Obviously, you got to reject secrecy as a condition of trust. Healthy relationships don't need hidden pacts. Hey, Russ, last two-part question here is, why is secrecy the foundation of most predator strategies? And can one small secret really lead to bigger compromises, and how?
Well, yeah, I think the biggest thing about it is it's just a psychological tool to create an inclusionary circle. If two people, have a shared secret, and that requires then, an unspoken tacit pact to be sure that neither side is going to tell. Suddenly we've removed ourselves from responsibility and duty into a different responsibility and duty that's at a personal level, to a personal phase of a relationship with this inmate. The same thing applies to a lesser degree in the real world, because there are no, for whatever else we want to say is that there are fewer or none at all artificial duties, and there's just an expectation that the confidence is going to be kept for whatever reason. And the correctional side of things, you have an affirmative duty to act. You have an affirmative duty to report. You have an affirmative duty to stay within the bounds of policy, procedure, state law, federal law, and case law. And so with all of those things on you, there's no way that you can agree that you're going to keep a secret. So that's something where they're attempting to draw you in to this inclusionary circle that involves only you two. And when you draw an inclusionary circle like that, it's kind of one of those things where you're also, you're drawing other people that are outside of that. And if they're all outside that and we're all in this circle, then we can be manipulated. Then we can be put into a position where we have to act against our duty, act against our oath, and so forth. And so it's really just a a cheap little parlor trick to try and exclude certain people and include only you two.
Yeah, and guys, listen, this is another form of obligation. I give you something, you give me something. Actually, I would say you get people that are so desperate for intel and corrections that they actually may fall for this, and get to the point where they protect their source, even though it could cause greater liability. That's why you really have to be a trained professional, or at some level trained in how to handle your sources in corrections, because the sources could easily manipulate you. This may have been one of the first games, to be honest with you, that I believe is very effective. I do, because I actually saw it almost happen to me once. I had a female that I believe was sexually assaulted, and she just basically only wanted to tell me because she didn't want to make a bigger scene out of it. But I held my gun. I did what I had to do. I reported what had to be reported, and then it turned out later on she changed her story. But it's okay. I mean, it is what it is. And then she could be mad at me for reporting it. But my loyalty is to what the agency expects. And there's nothing I did that wasn't in the benefit for that inmate. You know, okay, this maybe I even moved the inmate. But with that said, it did start where, you know, some people may just be so adamant about getting what the dialogue is. They'll accept something foolish like that. Okay, you can tell me, don't worry, I won't tell anybody else. No, and I wouldn't even start off by even making that promise just to manipulate information, because that's foolish too, because people are going to know that you can't be trusted. Tell them the truth right from the get-go. You know, inmate goes, I could tell you, but I can't tell anyone else. But you can't tell anyone else. It doesn't work that way. So let's say Russ was an inmate, hypothetically. He came to me and he said, hey, Gange, I got some information, but really, if you run with it, you know, you really can't run with it. Well, you're not here to tell me how to do my job. I kind of take it that way. Same thing in real world. Just remember that is a very powerful, powerful game. So final takeaway here is Russ is in prison. These red flags are treated as security breaches that are, you know, security breaches in progress. In the real world, too many people brush them off as quirks, awkwardness, or kindness. Predators use the same playbook everywhere because it works. Prison, real world doesn't matter. And the difference is training. Officers are trained to see it now. Now we've trained the audience a bit. Hey, Russ, anything you'd like to say in closing? Because it was a lot we covered.
Yeah, we covered a lot. I think that, you know, this is, you know, just a really good something that, you know, you could use in any class, you know, to make sure that, you know, you are on spot and on target with the way that you're interacting with inmates. I think that too often, you know, many of our institutions out there is they kind of, you know, get away from the basics. And even though this is like, to me, really basic stuff, if we forget about it and we're not steeped in it and we don't talk about it and we don't have, you know, classes or interactions such as those that are in this video, then our awareness dulls, and then, you know, we end up being manipulated, or we end up being taken advantage of, or a security breach of some sort happens. So don't let that happen. Take this to heart. I think that this is some great information, and you know, we're always out here to try and provide this.
Yes, and guys, I mean, the end of the day, guys, is we're trying to kind of see what are some of the stuff we learn from what we do in the prison, which is more compressed, and how do we apply that into the real world? Again, and there's always balance in what we provide you. So again, you have to figure out how these lessons have to apply. We're not teaching these so you can be paranoid, but rather teaching you in an effort to see both sides and find balance that best works for you. And guys, don't forget to check out the other content I have on here. We cover a lot, and it may look like on the surface it's just about corrections, but guys, we're dealing with managing human behavior. We're dealing with just so many things that relate to the real world. The lessons are there. Just got to pull it out. Even if you ignore the fact that this channel is about corrections, you can still get so much out of it. It's just so much there that, yes, it may apply to our world, but trust me, there's a lot of it that runs parallel. As always, guys, stay safe.